A teachers' union sues the state, alleging Texas crossed the line on political speech.
They were a state-sponsored attack on teachers because of what these educators were saying, not in classrooms, but privately in their own social media pages.
How investigations tied to social media posts about Charlie Kirk are fueling a broader debate over government power and the limits of free speech. A classic philosopher now at the center of a modern controversy, as a Texas professor is told to remove some of Plato's teachings from his syllabus.
Public universities are, for the first time in decades, limiting the promotion and the advocacy of transgender ideology. That is all that's going on here.
We'll break down what's behind the policy and how faculty are pushing back.
The usage of drones is a game changer.
When police investigate a crime, they often use flying drones to get information. So what are they capturing in the sky? A new state law could help people get answers.
Produced from the Capitol in Austin and airing statewide, this is the award-winning State of Texas.
Hello, and thank you for joining us. I'm Josh Hinkle. We start with a pair of stories that raise questions about the limits of free speech for educators. One of Texas's largest teachers' unions wants a judge to block the state's investigations into nearly 100 educators accused of making inappropriate comments about conservative activist Charlie Kirk following his shooting death. Investigative reporter Kelly Wiley reports the Texas branch of the American Federation of Teachers alleges the review of educators' social media comments is unlawful and violates their First Amendment rights.
So the complaint spells out
the head of one of the largest teachers unions in the country in Texas announcing its federal lawsuit filed against the Texas Education Agency.
They were a state-sponsored attack on teachers because of what these educators were saying, not in classrooms, but privately in their own social media pages.
The Texas AFT alleging in the new lawsuit that TEA pressured superintendents and principals to report teachers and other school personnel who posted about conservative activist and Turning Point USA founder Charlie Kirk's death, chilling their constitutionally protected speech. The directive came just 2 days after Kirk's death, and as some state lawmakers and the governor called out professors, students, and K-12 educators they accused of celebrating Kirk's death. The Texas Education Agency declined to comment on the pending litigation. KXAN has learned since September 12th, when Texas Education Commissioner Mike Morath called for a review of educators' comments on Kirk. The agency has received more than 350 complaints statewide. As of this week, the agency said it closed the majority of those cases, but 95 remain open and under investigation. Texas AFT says in the months since TEA launched its review, school employees have been placed on administrative leave, faced reprimands, and in some instances lost their jobs.
Things have gotten so bad for educators wrapped up in this that if you read the complaint, you'll notice that we've left the educators anonymous. Several of our members have already experienced an invasion of their privacy, and we don't want to expose them to additional personal risk.
In a statement back in September, Morath said there's a difference between comments made in poor taste and those that call for and incite further violence, the latter of which is clearly unacceptable. He went on to say he will be recommending such individuals be ineligible to teach in Texas public schools. But Texas AFT said in a lawsuit none of the social posts made by its members so encourage or incite violence in any way.
So far, the TEA has not sanctioned any educators tied to its review of social media comments. Texas AFT wants the court to order TEA to terminate the investigations and rescind the policy it sent out to superintendents, requiring them to report social media comments about Kirk.
Kelly, has there been any response to what state officials, parents, or school districts have done since the lawsuits were filed?
No responses from school districts, no responses from parents that I've heard, other than I think the general chatter about this matter. And then really, we're still waiting to see what TEA is even going to say. They don't typically comment on pending litigation, and they haven't so far.
How's the union advising educators to navigate social media now?
This actually came up during the press conference. The AFT president, Randy Weingarten, said that really, as soon as this started happening, as soon as they started to see people start talking about what educators were saying, they started doing training and actually talking about putting your Facebook or your social media on private. There have been educators that they probably consider their social media to be private because maybe they didn't have a lot of followers or people other than their family or friends engaging with them on it. But now the conversations are, you need to put your social media on private, and teaching them how to do that.
What's really next with the lawsuit?
Well, what's next for the lawsuit is really what TEA's response and answer in court is going to be. We know the allegations that the Texas AFT have leveled, which they're saying that this is unlawful. So it'll be interesting to hear how TEA feels that these reports, these misconduct reports, fit within the statutes that already exist.
All right, Investigator Kelly Wiley, thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Texas A&M University has flagged hundreds of syllabi in response to a new rule passed by the Board of Regents banning the advocacy of race or gender ideology in most courses. That number is according to the university's American Association of University Professors chapter. State Capitol reporter Adam Schwager spoke with several A&M professors about how it's affecting their classes, including one professor who had select works of Plato rejected.
Your syllabus is not approved, you have to censor it.
Texas A&M philosophy professor Martin Peterson has been with the university for over a decade. This week, he says the university told him 2 of his scheduled Philosophy 111 lectures on race and gender ideology were not approved. The assigned reading for those lectures, selections from Plato's Symposium.
He does not agree with the narrative that there are 2 biological sexes and that everyone should be heterosexual, right? So it is controversial, but that's the very point of including him in the syllabus.
State Representative and A&M alum Brian Henrikson says this is exactly what he's been fighting for.
Our public universities are, for the first time in decades, limiting the promotion and the advocacy of transgender ideology. That is all that's going on here, nothing more, nothing less.
In a statement, the university said Plato will be taught in a variety of classes this semester and in the future, but of course can, quote, not teach race or gender ideology.
So they seem to be saying that it's not so bad because we can talk about some parts of Plato's works. But come on, this is a philosophy department. Philosophers should, of course, be allowed to read and discuss everything Plato wrote.
Peterson's philosophy class is one of likely hundreds of classes affected. According to the head of A&M's chapter of the AAUP, in a meeting with professors from the College of Arts and Sciences,
there were about 200 or so classes that they've identified as being problematic.
And there might be more, with Dr. Leonard Bright saying they're working on public information requests to get the final numbers. In the end, Peterson was given a choice: remove the specific lectures or have the course taught by someone else. Peterson took a creative option.
I have replaced the banned modules with lectures on free speech and academic freedom, and the assigned reading is an article in New York Times about this case.
Peterson says this proposed alternative hasn't been approved yet. For State of Texas, I'm Adam Schwager.
A big change in the race for Texas governor, why one candidate's decision to drop out is already having an impact on Democrats seeking to challenge Greg Abbott. Jasmine Crockett and James Talarico set to face off on the debate stage, and the stakes are high. Why the target audience for the U.S. Senate debate could be key in deciding who wins the Texas primary. When police are called to investigate, they often bring in a drone to fly above and get information. So what are they capturing in the sky? A new state law could help get answers. We look at the new rules and a greater push for transparency. There's some big news in the race for U.S. Senate. Nexstar Media is partnering with Texas AFL-CIO to live stream a debate between Jasmine Crockett and James Talarico, the two Democrats running for their party's nomination. This will be the first time Crockett and Talarico will face off on the debate stage. The debate is happening at the Texas AFL-CIO convention. It will play a key part in deciding who will receive the union's endorsement in the primary. That endorsement could be a crucial factor in determining who wins the nomination.
It is an important endorsement because these are the true working people of the state of Texas. The workers of the state of Texas, the union members of the state of Texas are coming together, and they are going to be the deciding factor on how this election is going to turn out.
The hour-long debate is a Nexstar exclusive. You can watch it live on this Nexstar station's website or CTV streaming app on Saturday, January 24th at 2 p.m. There's also a big development in the race for Texas governor. Houston businessman Andrew White announced he's ending his campaign. White positioned himself as an independent Democrat in the March primary. He's the son of former governor Mark White. In a news release, he wrote, "This campaign was about expanding participation and pulling Texas back from the extremes. That work continues, and I encourage every Texan to be part of it." White said he's putting his support behind State Representative Gina Hinojosa. She said she was humbled and honored to have White's endorsement. Polls show Hinojosa is currently leading the Democratic field. Her opponents in the Democratic primary vowed to stay in the race. Retired firefighter and rancher Bobby Cole issued a response saying the party insiders and establishment Democrats are lining up behind their candidate, and it's the same playbook they've tried and failed at for decades to beat Republicans in Texas. Former Congressman Chris Bell also plans to keep campaigning. He sent a statement saying, "Debate lies at the very heart of our democracy. Competition creates leadership. I invite my peers and colleagues to engage in those tried and true traditions to give Texans a choice." Texas has a long history of incidents of mass violence. It's led lawmakers to take action. We look at some of the steps and the obstacles preventing change.
The report is so large that computers used around the legislature have a difficult time opening the file.
A shift in how police report drone use is now in place as a new Texas law takes effect. Why lawmakers changed the rules and the effect on government transparency. This week, we're re-examining our Special Catalyst investigative project that takes a critical look at the history of mass violence in Texas. We started the project in 2019 after deadly shootings in El Paso and Midland, Odessa. We examined mass shootings in Texas dating back to 1980. Since then, state leaders have taken some steps to prevent tragedies, but we wanted to take a closer look at where we stand today. Investigator Arzo Dost joined me for an in-depth conversation going inside the investigation. We want to share part of that conversation where we focus on a solutions journalism project called Stop Mass Shootings.
Well, you know, the fact that we continue to have these shootings, the conversations we're continuing to have, and the questions we're continuing to be asked, how can this continue to keep happening, right? And so as part of that, we wanted, you know, as you mentioned, Governor Abbott was really key on alertness and also training. And so as part of that, we were able to really focus on a group that is focused on training for law enforcement. Alert out of Texas State, known for advanced law enforcement rapid response training. What this group does, travels the country really to go train law enforcement. Today, more than 300,000 first responders have had this training, but it doesn't really stop there because the focus needs to be also on civilian communities, right? And given what we've seen with school shootings, there's now a big focus. And Alert, just speaking with them recently, tells me they are busier than ever because the demand has grown so much for not only for them to provide training for schools, hospitals, churches, but also the different departments that are starting to see some of these things play out in their own communities, whether big or small. So the focus is not only what do you do when a shooting happens like this, what do you do in that moment, but what do you do in the seconds after until first responders arrive? There are things like CPR, ways to prevent blood loss that you can do immediately to save lives. So this is really not just for first responders, but civilians, which is something that has been a key focus in the last several years.
And when we produce these stories for the Stop Mass Shootings project, we ended up sending those links to lawmakers who were involved in this conversation because we wanted them to be aware of some of the solutions we were exploring as they were considering what policies and legislation they could craft in a future session. So what ended up happening at that point was that the House and Senate both formed special committees to examine mass violence, much like what the Governor's Commission had done. And their intent was to hold hearings around the state. They went to El Paso, they went to Odessa, the places where the mass shootings had happened, talked to the people that had been impacted directly to kind of find out what, pieces of the conversation they had missed or that they wanted to make sure that they understood specifically before they started creating these bills for potential laws in the future. Unfortunately, what happened right around that time when we were going into the next legislative session were two major things in Texas and the United States as well. The coronavirus pandemic happened, and then we also had a major winter storm that knocked out the state's power grid. So, of course, with the COVID-19, there was no travel really, and so that kind of shut down a little bit of the conversations. And then when the state's power grid failed, of course, that kind of took over the agenda at the Capitol during that legislative session. So some of the legislation that they did want to propose did end up passing. Namely, there was one that required active shooter alerts to come out. If there was an active shooter, you would get an alert within 50 miles of that active shooting. But unfortunately, a lot of the things that they had intended to propose ended up not passing. That kind of brings us to what happened in 2022, though, because this is a problem, as I mentioned, that wasn't going away. We had Uvalde that happened. There was a shooter that came into the elementary school in Uvalde and killed 19 children and 2 teachers. One classroom, 19 children. And there was a lot of anger about that, a lot of things still playing out. But how is that one really impacting what we're doing in your mind?
Well, it takes you back to what you mentioned, going back to 1980 and talking to the families that were so gracious to relive those horrific moments with us. What they wanted, what they asked for is still playing out today. So it's hard not to ask, well, why haven't we done anything? Why have we really not focused on this? As you mentioned, as part of the Catalyst Project, we did a timeline where we heavily researched, looking at archives, newspapers, talking to victims, families involved. We did a timeline of 32 events where the focus was on incidents that involved more than 3 victims, not the shooter, and what happened in those situations, not only to the victims, survivors, but also law-wise. And we've covered everything from the shootings in Luby's, Killeen, where the Fort Hood was impacted, to Dallas, where police officers were targeted. Near us, you mentioned Uvalde, but also Sutherland Springs. I was one of the first reporters on scene to cover that shooting. And I will never forget the cries of family members as they were waiting to hear back if their loved one was inside that church during the Sutherland Springs shooting. So, we've come a long way as far as discussions go, and we even launched a roundtable discussion that was more than an hour long at UT that focused on gun policy and mental health and key questions that were being asked. And it's fair to say that today the frustrations are still there. What is being done? Why have we not really focused on gun policy like we should?
There is much more to our coverage. We posted our full conversation as well as our original reporting on the History of Mass Violence Project. Just look for the links in this week's State of Texas story. When police are called to investigate, they often bring in a drone to fly above and get information. So what are they capturing in the sky? A new state law could help get answers. We look at the new rules and a greater push for transparency. From investigating homicides to assisting in SWAT calls, drones play a major role for law enforcement across Texas. In 2024, the Texas Department of Public Safety reported more than 50,000 drone deployments. For perspective, in 2017, that number was just 35. Now, a new state law is changing how police departments report drone usage. It's part of a push for greater transparency. Eric Henrikson explores why police rely on the technology.
For law enforcement,
The usage of drones is a game changer.
Lieutenant Peter Kovac manages drone deployments for Austin Police.
We can utilize drones instead of having to put people inside structures, inside cars, things like that.
In 2025, the department put a drone up over 200 times.
Our drones are used on all tactical operations that we conduct with SWAT.
This training video shows how SWAT uses drones to track suspects. But they're also used for large-scale events like ACL, during search and rescue operations, and large crime scenes.
Homicide is our biggest customer that asks for drone usage.
Lieutenant Kovac says APD has always tracked drone usage. Under the old state law, police departments submitted a drone report directly to the governor and legislature.
The report is so large that computers used around the legislature have a difficult time opening the file.
Senator Pete Flores, author of Texas's new drone law, said just printing the old report cost too much.
All Senate Bill 2569 does is modernize the reporting requirements by simply requiring LEAs to post their reports to their public-facing website.
These reports, under the new law, must be published on odd-numbered years, starting next January.
I think the transparency on the reporting and getting it out there is really going to help people to see the big role that drones typically play is public safety.
Eric Henrikson, State of Texas.
One note, Austin police said they do not use drones for any type of use of force. While the drone usage report is released on odd-numbered years, on even-numbered years, police departments are required to file a drone use of force report to TCOL, the Texas Commission on Law Enforcement. Thank you again for joining us for State of Texas. I'm Josh Hinkle. We'll be back next week to bring you an in-depth look at Texas politics.